In the medieval world, water was not the pure, crystal-clear refreshment we imagine today. It was a gamble, a murky and unpredictable liquid that could either quench your thirst or slowly poison you. People of the Middle Ages lived in a time when the concept of water treatment was almost non-existent. Streams, rivers, ponds, and wells were the main sources of drinking water. But those same sources were also used for washing clothes, disposing of waste, and in some cases, even for dumping the remains of animals. Without modern understanding of germs, or the invisible threats lurking within, people often drank what they could find, unaware of the dangers it carried. The first problem was contamination. Towns and villages were built close to water sources for convenience. This meant that everything from household waste to human and animal excrement eventually found its way into the water. Rain washed refuse from streets and fields into streams, and open sewers sometimes emptied directly into rivers. If a butcher slaughtered animals nearby, blood and scraps could drift into the current. In large towns, the situation was even worse because of the sheer amount of waste produced. The water could look clear, but still contain microscopic killers. Another threat came from the proximity of water sources to burial grounds. In some areas, especially during times of plague or after battles, shallow graves near rivers or lakes could leach contaminants into the water supply. Medieval people did not understand how disease spread, but they did notice that illnesses seemed to appear more often after drinking from certain places. Unfortunately, without alternatives, many were forced to take the risk. Wells, often thought of as safer than surface water, were not immune to problems. If the well was dug too close to a latrine or midden heap, waste could seep into it underground. In towns with many people using the same well, the constant drawing of water could lower the water table, pulling in contaminated groundwater from nearby sources. In dry seasons, water in wells could become stagnant, allowing algae and bacteria to flourish. People might attempt to clean a well by pulling out debris or adding lime, but these measures were inconsistent and sometimes ineffective. The absence of proper sanitation made waterborne diseases a common part of medieval life. Dysentery, cholera-like illnesses, and typhoid fever spread easily in communities that relied on contaminated supplies. These diseases caused severe dehydration, vomiting, and diarrhea, which could be deadly, especially for children and the elderly. Outbreaks could sweep through towns rapidly, leaving little understanding of what had gone wrong. Theories at the time often blamed bad air or supernatural forces, rather than the water itself. In rural areas, water sources were less crowded but not necessarily safer. Farmers often allowed livestock to drink from the same streams they used for washing and cooking. The manure from cattle and pigs could mix into the water, adding harmful bacteria. Even clear mountain springs were not always reliable, as wild animals could die or defecate upstream, sending unseen pathogens into the flow. The lack of any filtration meant that people consumed these contaminants directly. One of the ways medieval people tried to avoid sickness from water was by drinking ale, beer, or wine instead. Brewing beer or boiling water for herbal infusions accidentally killed many harmful microbes, though they did not understand the science behind it. Ale was often weaker than modern beer, more like a nutritious, slightly alcoholic drink, safe for daily consumption, even by children. Wealthier households might drink wine, but for the poor, small beer was the common safeguard. Still, water could not be completely avoided, especially for cooking, bathing, or on long journeys where beer was unavailable. Monks sometimes filtered water through cloth or sand before use. This could remove some visible dirt, though not the dangerous microbes. The Cistercians were known for building elaborate water systems that diverted fresh streams to their abbeys, which gave them an advantage in health compared to the general population. However, even their methods could fail if the source itself became contaminated. Bathhouses, which were popular in many towns before the late Middle Ages, were another potential danger. Public baths often used communal tubs filled from the nearest water source, and without frequent changes, the water became a breeding ground for disease. Combined with the close contact of many bathers, illnesses could spread quickly. As fear of disease grew in later centuries, especially after the Black Death, public bathing declined in many areas. Partly due to the suspicion that it could make people sick, the situation was worse in times of siege or famine. When a city was under attack, fresh water supplies could be cut off, or poisoned deliberately by the enemy. People were forced to drink from stagnant wells or rain barrels, which often led to outbreaks of illness inside the besieged walls. In times of famine, when bodies were weaker and nutrition was poor, contaminated water could tip entire communities into disaster. The irony is that medieval people were not completely ignorant of the risks, even if they misunderstood the causes. Many preferred running water over still water, believing it to be fresher and safer. Some advised drawing water from upstream rather than near human activity. Others recommended letting water sit so that sediment could settle before drinking. In regions influenced by ancient medical texts, people might boil water or mix it with wine or vinegar for safety. These practices helped in some cases, but were far from universally applied. Seasonal changes also played a role in the danger. In summer, warmer temperatures encouraged bacterial growth, making illnesses more common. In winter, ice could trap waste in frozen rivers, which would be released in a concentrated flow during the thaw. Spring floods could stir up debris and filth from riverbeds, sending waves of contamination downstream. For communities relying entirely on nature's rhythms, these seasonal risks were inescapable. The effects of bad water went beyond individual illness. Whole communities could be weakened, making them vulnerable to other diseases, or less able to work the land. In medieval armies, poor water supplies often led to sickness spreading faster than battle wounds could claim lives. Merchants traveling long distances had to be careful about where they stopped to drink, as getting sick could delay their journeys or cost them their goods. Over time, some medieval cities began to improve their water management. Aqueducts, inherited from Roman engineering in certain places, were repaired or adapted. In London, conduits brought water from springs outside the city into central areas, reducing reliance on contaminated rivers. However, maintenance was costly, and not all towns could afford such improvements. Rural villages remained dependent on their local streams and wells for centuries. It is important to remember that despite the risks, water was not always deadly. People developed a certain resilience, and some may have had stronger immune systems from constant exposure. But the toll was still significant, and the link between bad water and sickness persisted throughout the Middle Ages. It was not until much later, with the development of germ theory and modern sanitation systems, that the true nature of waterborne disease was understood. Looking back, it is striking how something as simple as a drink of water could hold such danger. For us today, turning on a tap is an almost thoughtless act, a guarantee of safety in most parts of the world. For a medieval villager, filling a cup from the well could be a moment of hidden risk. Every sip was a gamble with health shaped by the unseen currents of contamination running beneath the surface. Water sustained life, but it could just as easily take it away. The story of medieval water is a reminder of how far we have come in protecting one of our most essential resources. It also shows how deeply human survival has always been tied to the natural world and its hazards. In a time without microscopes or chemical treatment, people lived with water's dual nature, giver of life and bearer of sickness. That balance, precarious and ever-shifting, was one of the defining challenges of medieval daily life. And that wraps up our journey into the murky, unpredictable world of medieval water. It is strange to think that something we take for granted today was once a daily gamble. For people back then, every sip carried a risk they could not see or understand. Wells, streams, and rivers might look inviting, but beneath the surface lay the invisible threats of waste, decay, and disease. We often imagine the Middle Ages as a time of knights, castles, and bustling markets, but the reality of daily survival was far more fragile. Water was life, yet it could just as easily bring death. Brewing beer, mixing drinks with wine or vinegar, and choosing running water over stagnant pools were small acts that made a huge difference, even if no one knew the real science behind them. Next time you pour yourself a glass from the tap, remember that it represents centuries of progress, from trial and error to engineering and modern sanitation. If you enjoyed exploring this hidden side of history, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep uncovering the gritty truths behind the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and appreciate every drop.